Last week, Danny Masterson, the star of That 70s Show, was convicted for raping 2 women. And as soon as that happened, you could take out your watch and count the seconds before the white media suddenly went into a lather reporting on some black man accused of something. That train is never late. And we didn't have to wait long. Almost immediately following the Masterson rape conviction, we began getting carpet-bombed with white media headlines claiming that Cosby's being sued in civil court. Again. Cosby has been sued so many times by now that another suit is meaningless. It's hardly front-page material. But we all know what this is really about. It's a white media racial narrative. Every time a story about Weinstein was written or he had a court date, here came accusations about Michael Jackson, who was already dead and had been in his grave for years. And of course, Oprah Winfrey had to obey her white media paymasters and say that, I just can't stand by Michael anymore, when the truth is that heifer never stood by him to begin with. She only said that mess so the white media could claim, see, even Michael's closest friends can't stand by him. They know that he's guilty. So with Cosby, we see the white media doing the same thing they did with O.J. Simpson 29 years ago, telling lies to hype it up, as if this black man who really hasn't been a hot commodity in ages is suddenly the most important person on the planet. With Cosby, we've seen this effort at racial distraction kick into overdrive, however. In states like New York, New Jersey, California, and Nevada, the legislatures have decided to pass laws that temporarily allow accusers to initiate civil suits against people, even though the statute of limitations passed decades ago. Now, first of all, if this was so important, why did they make it a temporary extension? Why not make it permanent? And look at the states where they passed these laws. New York, where half of these white media companies are based, and California, where the other half of these white media companies are based. And Nevada. Don't forget, Nevada is where O.J. Simpson was put on trial for trying to steal his own belongings. They tried to give him decades in prison for what everyone recognized was a racist attempt to punish him for the false murder charges that he disproved in court in the 90s. And what a surprise, the law that they passed in Nevada was only passed last week, but the white media is already crowing that there's at least one accuser in Nevada who's ready to file suit against Cosby. And as we saw in the O.J. trial out there in Nevada, I'm sure the jury will be all white women, just like it was for O.J. Simpson's trial there. So it's no accident that this is happening, and it's no accident that it's almost exclusively black men, or rather one in particular, who's being targeted by these laws. So why are these legislatures so eager, so hot and bothered to temporarily extend the statute of limitations? Look at the legislators who passed these laws. Ever since Me Too, you've had a raft of almost exclusively white legislators who have been accused, forced to resign, or even sent to prison for rape, sexual assault, and harassment. In 2017, Texas Congressman Blake Farenthold was forced to give up his seat after a sexual harassment scandal. In 2022, an Idaho state legislator was convicted of raping an intern and is currently serving 20 years for that. Bill Cosby was never convicted of rape, I should add. 3 months ago, a New York state lawmaker was forced to resign after accusations of sexual misconduct. In Texas, just last month, you had a state legislator who was trying to jump on the Ron DeSantis anti-groomer train, and then it came out that this damn near elderly man got a teenage aide drunk, then had sex with her, and afterwards sent her a threatening email saying she better not talk about it. Also, just last month, one of those Tennessee legislators who voted to expel those Democratic operatives was himself forced to resign over a sexual harassment scandal. And, as you would expect, California is where we've seen the worst of state lawmakers behaving badly. Since the Me Too scandal broke, at least 3 California state lawmakers have been forced to resign. In November 2017, the month after the Weinstein scandal broke, California Assemblyman Raul Bocanegra was forced to resign amidst accusations of sexual misconduct. The very next month, California Assemblyman Matt Dabina was forced to resign after multiple accusations accusing him of sexual harassment and sexual assault. On February 9th of 2019, California Assemblywoman Cristina Garcia was accused by a male aide of unwanted sexual advances. She was eventually disciplined by the legislature for her language. February 22, 2018, California State Senator Tony Mendoza resigns just as the state legislature was about to vote on forcibly expelling him. And in New York, things weren't any better. May 7, 2018, New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman resigns after 4 women accused him of sexual assault. March of 2021, New York Republican Congressman Tom Reed was accused by a lobbyist of sexually touching her. He denied the accusations but announced that he would leave Congress a little over a year later. October of 2021, Andrew Cuomo resigned as governor of New York amidst a storm of sexual misconduct accusations. Now we see why last November New York State was so eager to extend its own statute of limitations to file civil sexual assault lawsuits, and why California did the same in January of this year. But both of those states only allowed those extensions temporarily. California's statute extension ends in 2026. New York State's extension ends sooner than that, at the end of November of this year. Now, isn't that strange? As much noise as was made about Cosby and statutes of limitations, why did they go to the unprecedented step of extending those statutes so you can sue someone for allegations from 60 years ago, but then they want to make sure that it stops after only a year in New York or after 3 years in California? Why does New York think that the so-called justice that victims are talking about is only important for the next few months? And if this issue is so serious to California's legislature, why do something as strange as make it for only 3 years? Why not make it for 4 years? Or 10 years or 5? Why 3? Doesn't that strike you as an odd number? Because that's less than the standard 4-year political term that most politicians serve. That's why. This is a one-term maneuver that they want to use to manufacture the big bad black man headlines that they need to minimize the amount of time that white legislators get bad press for their own behavior. They might as well call these laws the Accuse Cosby Act, because that's what it is. This is no different than the Mann Act, which was written specifically to go after Jack Johnson. White supremacy believes in crafting laws tailor-made to come after black men. This is not a legislative move. This is just a temporary white media stunt. They need to gin up some convenient headlines for the moment. And as much talking as the white media has done about Bill Cosby and statutes of limitations, it's obvious to everyone who this is meant to apply to, and that's the entire point. The same way you see Republicans passing laws in Florida that are meant to encourage people to sue based on certain things, you see Democrats using the exact same playbook. So as we see these white lawmakers who are the main ones leading the charge to demonize black men, they're guilty of the very things that they're writing these statute of limitation extensions about. It's a zero-sum game. If they can't deflect attention onto a black man, then it's going to be their faces that are going to be on those headlines. It is pathetically, putridly obvious that the white media has been running an operation to get their own necks out of the noose. January 2018, Woody Allen's daughter accuses him of sexual abuse and sexual assault. A few months later, Bill Cosby was falsely convicted in 2018. And a few months after that, The New Yorker publishes a follow-up to Ronan Farrow's Weinstein piece. This time, the subject is the infamous CEO of CBS, Les Moonves. At least 6 women were accusing him of everything from sexual harassment to sexual assault. By September of 2018, following an internal investigation by CBS, Les Moonves was forced to step down. January 3, 2019, Lifetime, which is partially owned by the Walt Disney Corporation, put out the Surviving R. Kelly series. 7 months later, R. Kelly is charged by the feds in New York, based largely because of that so-called series. This was a case of the white media and the government working together, and just to show that this was a coordinated effort, just a few weeks after the Lifetime R. Kelly series debuted, HBO debuted their own Michael Jackson smear piece, Leaving Neverland, at the Sundance Film Festival. Now, something important needs to be noted. Documentaries and series take a long time to do. Anyone who follows the development of movies or TV series knows that. Just ask brothers like TBA or Tariq how long it takes them to make their documentaries. It's not a short and quick process. Documentaries by these big companies take at least a year to do. So for Leaving Neverland and Surviving R. Kelly to both come out in January of 2019, that means HBO and Lifetime had both begun working on these things since around the time of the Weinstein scandal. Remember, Ronan Farrow's New Yorker piece that blew the Weinstein scandal wide open was published in October 2017. Now, it takes a year for them to make these documentaries, or in the case of R. Kelly, a TV series. From the time somebody does their first pitch to the time that it makes it to air is about a year. So that being the case, you can already tell that they began working on that thing for all of 2018 and at least a little bit of 2017. That proves that Lifetime and HBO are pursuing an agenda. As soon as they saw a white man being exposed and how massive the coverage Weinstein was getting, they began mobilizing in late 2018 to put together some racial counter-programming. They saw the nonstop parade of white men who were being dragged in the media, and they made up their minds that they needed to go ahead and manufacture a steady barrage of black faces to put out there instead. This way the public would get the false impression that there's just this avalanche of black men doing bad, and that this is who the real sexual predators are. October 2019, Cuba Gooding Jr. is accused of unwanted sexual touching and is dragged into court on criminal charges. January 2020, Lifetime puts out its second season of Surviving R. Kelly. The steady drumbeat of making black men the face of sexual assault in America continues. A few weeks later, on February 24, 2020, Harvey Weinstein is convicted of rape. At that point, he was the only high-profile white media figure to actually be dragged into court on criminal charges and convicted. That is, until just last week. June 2021, the illegal constitutional violation of Bill Cosby's rights is predictably overturned on appeal and he's released. The white media was beside itself with rage ever since. 3 months after that, R. Kelly is convicted in federal court. January of 2022, Showtime had their bootlick Kamau Bell put out their propaganda piece, "We Need to Talk About Cosby." Showtime is owned by Paramount, the same company which also owns CBS, which Les Moonves was the chairman of. September of 2022, in a case that smells suspiciously like double jeopardy, R. Kelly is put on trial again, this time in Chicago for basically the same charges as in New York. He's convicted again. And in January of this year, Lifetime takes a victory lap with a third season of Surviving R. Kelly, this after he's been convicted. They call it the final chapter, but of course, when it comes to bashing black men, that's really not something that the white media takes a break on. Now, of course, there were other black men who the white media tried to make a run at seeing if they could lynch them in the media, but Cosby and Kelly were the only two that they got to the point of a trial. And as we saw with Cosby, they had to break the law in order to engineer a conviction against him. So we see that there's been this blatantly coordinated effort by the white media to maintain a steady drumbeat of images and claims and stories about black men being the rapists. Since October 2017, people have been talking about Weinstein and Kevin Spacey and Les Moonves and Paul Haggis and Charlie Rose, Matt Lauer, Louis C.K., Don Hewitt. And then we saw the white media abruptly decide that they're not going to be covering those guys anymore, and instead we saw a steady stream of headlines about basically two black men. It's meant to throw up a wall of white noise. As long as we're talking or arguing about Cosby, nobody's talking about the Les Moonveses out there. If the statute of limitations has been extended in California, then shouldn't people be looking into Les Moonves? But then again, as the black media has shown you, the LAPD themselves were personally protecting Les Moonves. You had an LAPD captain, Corey Polka, who I told you about on this channel. Then Captain Polka was exposed as being Moonves' man on the scene inside the LAPD, and he said that he gave Moonves his allegiance. His words. I'm not making that up. The week that Moonves was forced out of CBS, his buddy Polka sent him a note saying, "I will always stand with, by, and pledge my allegiance to you." Gee, if only he showed that level of devotion and allegiance to the people of Los Angeles. The city wouldn't be the crime-infested trash heap it is. But unfortunately, the cops out there are far more interested in hobnobbing with studio executives and having pictures taken with the stars than they are with small things like law enforcement. Serve and protect indeed. They serve white media executives and protect them from the legal consequences of their own behavior. When the accusations were made against Moonves in 2017, Polka immediately handed what was supposed to be a confidential report over to CBS executives. And he also made sure that Moonves was given the information as well. That report gave the name of the accuser as well as her address. Now, whatever became of this revelation, you might ask? A LAPD captain, not a patrolman, not a sergeant, but a captain, violated department procedures and the law by giving a suspect a confidential report. Moonves had not been charged with anything, mind you. So he had no constitutional right to confront his accuser because he had not been charged, hence he had not been accused. So Moonves had no legal right to see that report, and Polka had no legal right to give it to anyone. So what happened? Did Polka get suspended? Of course not. Nothing happened. Polka was allowed to retire in 2021 after 34 years of allegiance to Les Moonves. So if we're looking at Bill Cosby, and we're going to go back 50 plus years to try to gin up a case against him, then let's go back 35 years or so to look at what Les Moonves was doing. But the white media is asking no questions about that, same way the LAPD hasn't. The white executives who run the white media are desperate to keep attention off themselves, and the white legislators are also desperate to keep attention off of themselves. You just had a member of the Texas legislature expelled for accusations of sexual misconduct, and then you had Danny Masterson, the star of that 70s show, convicted for raping 2 women, and as we all know, that means they'd have to find a black man to drag. That's what's going on here. At this point, everyone can see the pattern because it's excruciatingly clear, as it's meant to be, and if you deny it, you're a liar, an idiot, or both. Even if you're one of these people, the shea butter Twitter crowd who hates black men to their core, you still can't deny that Bill Cosby has been a dry well for these white supremacists. It keeps blowing up in their faces. Danny Masterson, on the other hand, was convicted of raping 2 women, something Bill Cosby has never done. Masterson was the star of a hit TV show, just like Cosby, but the white media decided that didn't rise to the level of actually covering the investigation of that trial. They gave sporadic mention to it at best, so the public just assumes that there was nothing important about Danny Masterson, and that was the point. Meanwhile, they took a D-list nobody like Jussie Smollett and acted like he was the Lindbergh baby kidnapping or something, just like they did with O.J. Simpson. It's not about the law, it's about race. Danny Masterson is, or was now, a member of Scientology. Now, Scientology has been assailed and accused of being a cult by its own members, some of them high-profile stars like Leah Remini. So given Scientology's long-standing and notorious reputation, it seems a no-brainer that Lifetime or HBO or all these white media networks should have been doing Surviving Danny Masterson series or documentaries. Kamau Bell should drag his head out of Paramount's behind and do another so-called documentary about the abuse that religious institutions carry out. Kamau Bell wanted to run his mouth about abuse of power. Well, with Danny Masterson's rapes, you have a situation where religion, celebrity, and money intersect. And he's not saying anything about that. He doesn't even care about it. Les Moonves, one of the most powerful media executives of all time. In his case, you have an intersection of fame, money, media, and the corrupt LAPD. Kamau Bell hasn't even tweeted about it. Perhaps that's because Moonves worked for the same Paramount Corporation that also owns Showtime, who financed and broadcast Kamau Bell's slanderous hit piece against Cosby. If Kamau Bell was an honest broker for truth and not some pathetic paid operative, then he ought to be making noise about making a documentary about Les Moonves. Because, as Kamau Bell said, this is about men abusing power, right? No, wait. That's not what Kamau Bell actually said. He said his documentary on Bill Cosby was about black men abusing their power. Black men have no power in this society. Kamau Dumbbell didn't even finance that mockumentary that he put out. He had to have a white media company do it for him. It wouldn't have existed without their money. But he didn't give much mention of that. And you don't see any other white media operatives trying to make a crusade about this either. Same way you haven't seen anyone in the white media making a crusade out of going after Woody Allen. Now, I understand why Ronan Farrow, who is Woody Allen's son, isn't touching that one. He said he believed his sister's accusations, but he went no further than that. My problem is nobody else is either. Nobody's making a jihad out of going after Roman Polanski either. You don't see any topless thoughts deciding to photobomb him in public, do you? You don't see anybody who's calling themselves running up on him. And it's not as if nobody knows where he is. Hell, he's been working openly. He's been the belle of the ball at all of those European award ceremonies. He frequently gets visited by the rich and famous of Hollywood like Harrison Ford and Alec Deadeye Baldwin. But nobody's going at Roman Polanski. That's how you know all that stuff with Cosby that they were doing, the women who were getting in front of the cameras and performing, it was all staged by the white media. That's why nobody's coming at Roman Polanski. In fact, we see the white media trying to rehabilitate Roman Polanski's image. The only reason that rapist's name came back to prominence was because of an independent documentary that got made about him. But HBO and Showtime, Paramount, they all have millions of dollars to devote to attacking Bill Cosby, to devote to attacking black men in general. But then when someone says we need to talk about Woody Allen, or we need to talk about Roman Polanski, who everyone agrees is a pedophile and a child rapist, when someone says we need to talk about Les Moonves, we need to talk to his victims, all of a sudden the white media says, let's change the subject. You have the propaganda arm of white supremacy working hand in hand with the administrative arm, the government, and they're both pursuing a program of accusing black men and then manufacturing a legal basis to drag them into court and pretend as if it's just the biggest story in the world, but making sure to never apply those standards to white offenders. So no matter how guilty Les Moonves is, 6 women accused him, by the way, it won't be an issue in the white media, and the LAPD have made it clear they refuse to move on it either. It's about making black men the whipping boy and making sure black men stay the whipping boy. Any pathetic accusation you make about Bill Cosby, I can give you a dozen white celebrities and politicians and businessmen who have actually done the things Cosby is merely being accused of. If it's about holding criminals accountable, then why are they only going after the one man who hasn't done anything and has proven his innocence time and time again? Their would-be steady drumbeat against black men is so weak that they literally have to put the same old 1 or 2 stale accusations on repeat non-stop. They got the anti-Cosby material on reruns now. They just have so few black men with accusations against them, they gotta keep using the same 2 names over and over again, Cosby and R. Kelly. All so they can try to maintain the white media lie that when you hear about a white man being convicted or accused of something, well, you gotta make sure that there's a headline about a black man being accused or investigated or something. It's meant to create a false equivalence in people's minds, because people almost never read beyond the headlines. That's why you need the black media. We actually look at these white media lies and tell you more than just the headlines. Because most people may remember hearing something about Chris Brown or about Michael Irvin or whomever, but they don't even remember that all those accusations against all those black men turned out to be false. They thought they had a win with Cosby, but that one predictably turned out to vindicate him as well. With Cosby, the white media hated having to report that the engineered unconstitutional conviction against him got overturned, so instead they just lied and called the accusers victims anyway. Understand something. So the white media and these white legislators, this isn't about whether Cosby or R. Kelly did it or not. I say that for the people who are slow on the uptake. The people who are doing all this, they could care less about innocence or guilt. All that matters is getting the headlines out there. That's the point. This is about conditioning the public mind. They use black men as a shiny object to distract people. And while the black man is busy fending off these false accusations, the white media puts all the cameras on the black man and allows the Mark Foleys and all of these other reprobates I told you about earlier to slither away back to their media or governmental jobs. And then by the time the black man has disproven the accusations against him or gotten the false convictions overturned, well, the white media executives and legislators are safe for the time being because people will have moved on to some other issue or headline. And that's the point. That's why they do it. But just in case Kevin Spacey gets accused again, or Danny Masterson gets convicted, they just rinse and repeat the same old talking points, accuse Cosby of something, drag Jonathan Majors, we need to talk about Cosby, etc. And because they control what the cameras focus on, more often than not, they can get away with it, which is the entire point. You have white media executives and politicians trying to keep themselves from being forced out of office, out of their jobs, or into a prison cell. So the same 2 names get brought up as a red herring. Understand what it is that's going on here. See what's happening from the viewpoint of the white media, scared out of their minds and desperate for a distraction. Nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy, because the beneficiaries of white supremacy have interrelated interests. You see if these people go to the same schools, live in the same neighborhoods, same social clubs, same universities, have the same jobs, and in many cases are married to the same people. That's no coincidence. As we saw with Michael Jackson, even if the black man is dead, they'll still try to use him as a distraction anyway, so there's no lengths the enemy won't go to, there's no depths that they won't stoop to. We have to be just as vigilant in our efforts to call out the lies, the hypocrisy, and to make sure people understand what they're seeing, and that the perpetrators of sexual violence don't make black men into scapegoats. No matter what they tell you, the goal is not and has never been to extend the statute of limitations for lawsuits. They made that clear by how quickly these extensions are going to expire. The true goal has always been to impose a statute of limitations on the public memory. I've always taught you that history is whatever people have been told the most, and when people are told a lie repeatedly, that is what they remember, no matter what the true record may be. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Mouse, Zakiah Wesley, Keith Baker, Michael Gilmore, and Deborah Gallman. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.